The Union Station was a strange place. It was not a military base, not a city, and not a transport hub anymore. Once it had been full of ships coming and going. But after the war, it became a quiet meeting point for those who had fought. Some came to find old friends. Some came to drink away the years. Some came simply because they did not know where else to go. On the far side of the main hall, an old veteran named Ralvik sat alone at a small round table. His scales, once a deep bronze, had faded to a dull gray-green. A metal arm rested where his left limb had once been, its fingers clicking softly as they opened and closed. His eyes were sharp, but there was a weight in them, the kind that came from too many battles and too many goodbyes. The younger recruits noticed him right away. They were fresh from training, their uniforms crisp and their energy unspent. They had heard whispers about Ralvik from the moment they arrived. Everyone said he had fought alongside humans during the Orion campaign. For most of them, humans were only a name in their history books, a small and strange species from the far edge of the galaxy. In their lessons, humans were spoken of as fragile creatures with limited strength and short lifespans. It was hard for the recruits to imagine such beings as great warriors. A group of 5 young aliens decided to approach him. Their leader, a tall and lean soldier named Garan, stepped forward first. Behind him were 3 others from the same class, and the youngest, barely past academy age, walked last. They carried mugs of warm coffee, an unspoken gift for the veteran. Garan placed one of the mugs in front of Ralvik and smiled politely. "We were told you fought with humans," he said. "We hoped you might tell us a story." Ralvik studied them. For a long moment, his gaze moved from face to face, as if weighing whether they were ready for what he might say. The metal fingers of his prosthetic hand tapped against the table. Then, without a word, he reached for the mug and took a slow sip. "You want to hear stories about humans," he said at last. His voice was low and rough, each word carrying a weight that made the recruits lean closer. "I can tell you, but you should know this. The things I tell you are not the stories you will find in your academy books. Those are cleaned and polished. What I saw was real, and it stays with me still." The youngest recruit, a bright-eyed soldier named Darrow, leaned forward eagerly. "Were they as strange as everyone says?" Ralvik gave a short laugh, though it held no humor. "Strange, yes. Very strange, and far more dangerous than you believe." He set the mug down and folded his hands. One metal and one flesh. The recruits could see faint scars running along his right arm, disappearing beneath the sleeve of his coat. It was during the early days of the Orion campaign. He began. Our forces were already stretched thin. The enemy had numbers and weapons we had never faced before. We were losing ground faster than we could take it back. That was when the humans arrived. No one expected much from them. Their ships were small, their technology old by our standards, and they had only a few battalions to offer. The other commanders thought they would be little more than a distraction. He paused for another sip, watching their faces. "The first time I saw them was on the plains outside Vorka's Ridge. Our line had been broken, and the enemy was pushing hard. Dust filled the air from the bombardment, and the ground shook beneath our feet. Through that chaos, I saw a column of human soldiers, moving forward, not back, forward. Their armor was dented and scratched, their uniforms patched in more places than I could count. And still they marched. There was no hesitation in their steps, no sign of fear. It was as if they had been born into the sound of gunfire and the smell of burning air." The recruits listened closely now. Even Garan, who had approached with a half-smile, seemed caught by the picture Ralvik painted. "At first I thought they were reckless," Ralvik said. "Why walk toward a fight you might not survive? But there was something about them. The way they moved together, the way they spoke to each other without shouting. Every one of them carried more weight than I thought possible. Packs full of supplies, ammunition belts slung over both shoulders, heavy rifles in their hands. I learned later that many of them had been awake for more than a day before reaching the ridge, and still they moved like the battle had only just begun." Darrow frowned slightly. "But they are smaller than us, are they not?" Ralvik nodded. "Most are shorter than I am, Many are thinner than your kind, but strength is not only in muscle. I saw it in their eyes. They carried something I cannot explain. You could feel it even before they fired a single shot. It was as if they had already decided the battle would be theirs, and nothing would change their minds. He leaned back in his chair, the metal arm resting across his lap. That first day, they took back ground we thought lost. They fought from sunup until the moons rose. And when it was over, they were still standing. I remember walking among them after the fight. Some were wounded, some covered in dust and grime, but they smiled as if they had just returned from a game. One of them offered me water before taking any for himself. The recruits shifted uneasily. They had heard of bravery before, but this sounded different. Ralvik's gaze swept across them again. You think I'm telling you a tale to make them seem larger than life. I'm not. This is only the beginning. You want to know the truth about humans? Then understand this. They are not the largest, not the fastest, not the strongest. But when the moment comes, they fight as if the universe itself depends on it. And they will keep fighting long after reason says they should stop. The hall seemed quieter now. Somewhere in the distance, a service drone hummed as it cleaned the floor. The recruits waited for him to continue, but Ralvik only reached for his mug again. When you asked for stories of humans, he said slowly, you are asking to see war through their eyes. And that is not something you can forget once you have heard it. He placed the mug down with a soft click. The recruits exchanged glances, their earlier lightness replaced by a growing curiosity and a touch of unease. Ralvik had not yet told them what made humans truly frightening, but they could feel that answer was coming, and that was exactly why none of them were going to walk away. The recruits leaned closer as Ralvik adjusted himself in the chair. The metal joints in his arm gave a faint click, but he paid them no mind. His gaze was far away now, as if the hall around him had faded and been replaced by the windswept plains of Vorka's Ridge. It was early in the campaign. Ralvik began. We had been fighting for weeks without rest. Our supply lines were cut, and the enemy was pressing hard from the east. Vorka's Ridge was the only high ground for kilometers in every direction, and whoever held it controlled the valley below. We had already lost half our defense posts. Morale was low, and the younger soldiers looked like they were ready to break. That was when the humans arrived. He paused and let the words settle. The recruits exchanged quiet glances, already picturing the scene. They came in small landing craft. Ralvik continued. Nothing like our armored transports. The ships were old, patched with mismatched plates, engines coughing smoke as they touched down. When the hatches opened, I expected to see tired, slow-moving troops. Instead, they came out at a steady march, eyes sharp, weapons ready. Each carried more gear than I thought possible. Some had rifles slung over both shoulders. Others carried heavy cases I would have needed help to lift. They were armor that had clearly seen many battles. Dents and scorch marks told stories before a single word was spoken. One of the recruits, the tallest among them, tilted his head. Were they not slowed down by all that weight? Ralvik gave a slow shake of his head. They move as if the weight was nothing. More than that, they moved together. No one wandered. No one complained. They had no grand speeches, no music to announce their arrival. They simply joined our lines and started working. The memory seemed to warm him. Slightly, they set up their camp in less than an hour. I watched them dig trenches, lay down makeshift barriers, and share supplies without a single order shouted. One of them, an older soldier with a long scar on his cheek, passed by me, carrying 3 crates stacked high in his arms. I asked if they needed help, and he just smiled and said they were used to heavier loads back home. I did not understand then, but I learned later that their homeworld had gravity stronger than ours. Carrying such weight was nothing new to them. He leaned forward now, his voice lowering. That night, the enemy came. The recruits shifted in their seats. They attacked under cover of darkness, hoping to catch us sleeping. The wind howled across the ridge, carrying dust and the smell of rain. We were outnumbered to 1, maybe more. Our lines began to buckle within minutes. I thought we would be overrun. But then, I saw the humans. Ralvik's eyes were steady now, locked on the memory. They did not fall back. They moved forward. Through the dark, they advanced in groups of 4, covering each other with precise fire. Their rifles barked in a steady rhythm, never wasting a shot. I saw one soldier, a small woman no taller than my shoulder, hold her position against a squad 3 times her number. She moved like water, never standing in the same spot for more than a breath, her aim never faltering. When her weapon overheated, she switched to a sidearm without missing a beat. He took a slow sip from his mug, letting the recruits imagine the scene. They fought as if the night belonged to them. I realized something: then humans do not fear darkness the way some species do. It is part of their nature. They are used to hunting in it, living in it. To them, night is not a cover for retreat. It is a time to strike. One of the younger recruits, Darrow, spoke up in a quiet voice. "Did you fight beside them?" Ralvik nodded. "I was on the southern line when a breach opened near our forward post. I ran to help. But before I could reach it, 3 humans had already moved in. They fought shoulder to shoulder, their voices low but firm. One would fire, the other would reload, and the third kept watch for flanking enemies. When their ammunition began to run low, they used whatever was at hand. A broken beam became a shield. A jagged piece of metal became a weapon. There was no hesitation, no panic, only movement." He glanced down at his metal arm, the fingers curling slightly. "I remember the moment I was hit. An explosion threw me to the ground, and I could not feel my left side. The world was spinning, and I thought I would be finished there on that ridge. But before the enemy could reach me, a human soldier dragged me back to safety. He was smaller than me, yet he pulled me as if I weighed nothing. He patched my wound, handed me his own spare weapon, and went back to the fight without waiting for thanks." The recruits sat in silence now. Even the sound of the station beyond their table seemed far away. When the sun rose, Ralvik continued, "The ridge was still ours. The humans had fought without rest through the entire night. Some collapsed the moment the fighting stopped, but they smiled as they did. They checked on their comrades before tending to themselves. And when the enemy fell back, the humans did not celebrate. They began preparing for the next battle." Garan, who had been quiet until now, finally spoke. "Did they lose many?" Ralvik's expression grew still. "Yes, but they did not break. I learned that day that humans carry their losses differently. They feel the weight, yes, but they turn it into something else: determination, resolve, a promise to keep fighting until the end. I have never seen another species do it quite the same way." He finished the last of his drink, setting the mug down carefully. "That was my first real encounter with humanity in war. I thought it was an unusual display of courage. I thought perhaps they were just a rare group of skilled fighters. But I was wrong. What I saw on that ridge was only a small glimpse of what they are capable of. And the battles that came next would prove it." Ralvik sat back, his eyes distant again. The recruits were leaning forward in their seats, caught between fascination and a quiet, growing respect for the strange warriors they had never met. None of them spoke for several seconds. The old veteran finally glanced at each of them in turn. "Remember what I told you? Humans are not dangerous because of their weapons or their ships, or even their numbers. They are dangerous because once they decide to hold a line, they will hold it until the stars burn out. And that is something no enemy truly understands until it is too late." The recruits knew then that the next part of his story would take them deeper into the heart of the campaign, and none of them wanted to miss a word. The recruits had gone still in their seats, their mugs forgotten. Ralvik's eyes narrowed slightly, as if he was preparing them for what came next. The tale so far had only been the beginning, and they could sense it. "After that first night," Ralvik began, "the humans stayed with us at Vorka's Ridge. None of us knew it at the time, but the enemy had no intention of leaving. They surrounded us in the days that followed. It became a siege, and we were cut off from most of our supplies." The old warrior let out a slow breath. Food was scarce, and water even more so. The air on the ridge was thin, and the dust storms came almost every afternoon. Some of our soldiers began to grow restless. Others became quiet and withdrawn. But the humans, they did not seem shaken. They kept busy every waking moment. If they were not repairing walls, they were digging trenches. If they were not digging trenches, they were building traps. Darrow tilted his head. Traps? Ralvik gave a short nod. Yes. They were clever with whatever they could find. I remember seeing one of them take a pile of broken metal parts and turn it into a field of jagged obstacles. Another tied ropes between ruined barricades, so low that the enemy would trip when they charged. They even built fake weapons from scrap to make our defenses look stronger than they were. Every move they made sent a message to the enemy. We're not giving up. He leaned forward, resting his metal hand on the table. The siege lasted weeks. The enemy bombarded us almost every night. They would send small raiding parties in the early hours, testing our defenses, looking for weakness. Many of our soldiers began to lose sleep. Yet every time I walked past the human camp, I saw them planning. Their leaders met in small circles, speaking in low voices. Their eyes fixed on maps drawn into the dirt. Even their laughter was quiet, as if they knew the ridge itself was listening. Ralvik's eyes softened slightly. They shared what little food they had with others. I saw them give away full rations to soldiers who were not from their own units. When the water tanks ran low, they volunteered to take the dangerous path down the slope to fetch more. Knowing the enemy could fire at them from hidden positions, they would come back scratched, tired and dusty, but always with enough water for everyone. The recruits were listening closely now. Even Garan's usual confident posture had shifted, his shoulders drawn forward. Then came the 7th night of the siege. Ralvik continued. It was the worst yet. The enemy launched a heavy bombardment, shaking the ridge from end to end. Dust filled the air, and the sky lit with fire. They were preparing for a full assault. We all knew it. I could hear the thunder of their machines below, the sharp clatter of their weapons. Every instinct told me the line would break that night. He paused for a moment, his gaze fixed on something far away. The humans thought differently. They moved into position without a word. I saw them checking each other's armor, sharing ammunition, and making quick adjustments to their weapons. Their faces were set, their eyes locked forward. When the bombardment stopped, the night went silent for a moment. That was when the enemy charged. Ralvik's voice became steady, almost hard. They came in waves, shouting as they ran up the slope. Our lines held for the first few minutes, but the pressure was too much. Sections began to bend. I saw two positions fall. The soldiers there forced to retreat. It was in those moments that the humans moved. The recruits leaned forward again. They did not wait for orders. They split into small teams, each moving to where the line was weakest. I watched one group hold an entire section with nothing but rifles and their determination. Another pushed forward, taking back ground the enemy had just captured. They fought in pairs and trios, covering each other, pulling the wounded back, never letting the enemy gain more than a few steps. Ralvik's metal fingers tapped the table slowly, like the beat of distant drums. The strangest thing was the way they used their surroundings. A pile of rubble became cover. A half-collapsed wall became a shooting position. Even the shadows worked for them. They made the ridge itself their ally. He allowed himself the faintest smile. I was with a mixed group of our soldiers and humans on the western flank when the enemy pushed hard. We were almost out of ammunition. A human beside me, a tall man with a deep voice, told us to hold for just a little longer. Then he ran forward with only a sidearm, drawing the enemy's fire while the rest of us fell back to reload. When we returned, he was still there, moving like a shadow between the rocks, forcing the enemy to scatter. That single action gave us the time we needed to hold the ridge. The recruits exchanged glances, their eyes wide. When the attack finally ended, Ralvik said, "The ridge was still ours. We had losses, yes, but the enemy had paid heavily for every step they tried to take." The humans were covered in dust and smoke, their armor scorched, their hands shaking from exhaustion. But when the call went out to check the defenses, they were the first to stand up. They went back to work without asking for rest. The old veteran's voice softened now. That was when I understood something about them. For humans, a battle is not only about surviving the fight, it is about making sure the next one is won as well. They never think in terms of only one night, one ridge, one victory. They think of the war as a whole, and because of that, they never stop preparing. Ralvik looked around the table, meeting each pair of young eyes. The siege of Vorka's Ridge did not break us because of our weapons or our walls. It held because the humans refused to let it fall. And when you fight beside such people, you begin to believe you can do the same. The recruits sat in silence for several moments. The distant hum of the station returned to their ears, but it felt faint compared to the weight of the story they had just heard. Finally, Goran spoke in a quiet tone. "What happened after the siege?" Ralvik gave a slow nod, as if the question had been expected. "After the siege came the night when the sky itself burned. And that is a story you will not forget once you hear it." The recruits leaned forward once more, ready for whatever came next, narrowed as if remembering a scene that had been burned into his mind. The siege had ended, he said slowly, but the enemy was not finished. They had lost the ridge, yet they wanted revenge. We thought they would regroup and attack again on the ground. Instead, they came from above. The recruits exchanged uneasy glances. It began just after sunset. Ralvik continued. The sky was still glowing orange from the dying sun when we saw the first lights far in the distance. At first, we thought they were just stars coming out. Then the lights grew larger, brighter, and we heard the low hum of engines. A squadron of enemy bombers was coming in. They were not here to test our defenses. They were here to burn us out completely. He paused, his metal hand resting flat on the table. The first wave came fast. Bright fire streaked down from the sky, slamming into the ridge with deafening force. Barricades exploded into splinters, trenches filled with smoke. The air was so hot it hurt to breathe. I could barely see more than a few steps in front of me through the dust and flame. And yet, through that chaos, I saw the humans move. Ralvik's voice steadied as he continued. While many of us were still trying to find cover, the humans were already pulling the wounded out of the fire. I saw a soldier named Tomas lift 2 injured fighters over his shoulders and drag a third by the arm. The flames curled around them, but he kept going until all 3 were behind the main line. When another section of the ridge caught fire, a group of humans ran toward it with whatever they could find, blankets, sand, even their own jackets, trying to put the flames out before they spread. Darrow, the youngest recruit, spoke in a hushed tone. They ran toward the fire. Yes, Ralvik said firmly, and not just once. The enemy kept coming in waves, each bombing run tearing open new wounds in the ridge. The humans never stopped, moving toward the danger. Some carried stretchers, others carried ammunition. A few climbed unstable walls to pull trapped soldiers free. I remember one human woman swinging a heavy beam aside, with such force that it cracked the ground when it landed. She had burns on her arms, but she did not stop. He leaned forward, his voice deepening. In the middle of that nightmare, I realized something important. Most soldiers, when trapped under fire from above, wait for it to end before acting. Humans do not wait. They fight the disaster as it happens. They treat the fire, the smoke, the destruction as part of the battlefield itself, and because of that, they save lives others cannot. The recruits were silent, their eyes fixed on the old veteran. The second wave of bombers came. Ralvik went on. This time, they targeted our supply caches. The explosion shook the ridge so hard that some of our defenses collapsed entirely. I was near the western flank when one of the storage areas was hit. Flames leapt up taller than a transport ship. Inside, ammunition was cooking off, each round exploding like thunder. It should have been a place no one would enter, but 3 humans did. They went in through the smoke, coughing and half-blind, to carry out crates of weapons before the fire reached them. They came out with burns and blackened armor, but they came out alive. And they brought enough supplies to keep our position from falling. Goran, who had remained silent for a while, spoke carefully. Were they ordered to do this? Ralvik shook his head. No, they did it because they saw it needed doing. That is the way of humans. Orders matter, yes, but when there's a choice between waiting and acting, they act. The old warrior's gaze drifted downward for a moment before returning to the recruits. The third wave was the worst. The bombers dropped something heavier this time. I did not know the name of the weapon, but when it hit, it split into burning pieces that clung to anything they touched. The ground was on fire. The air was on fire. Even the walls of rocks seemed to glow red. It felt like the whole ridge was being swallowed. Ralvik's voice softened. I thought we would all be finished there. But the humans, they kept moving. I saw them break into teams. One group for the fires directly, throwing dirt and stone over the flames. Another group ran the wounded down the safer side of the slope, away from the bombing zone. The third group, smaller than the others, took up firing positions and began shooting into the sky. They had no heavy anti-air weapons, only rifles, but they still tried, and somehow they hit one of the bombers. I saw it spiral away, smoke pouring from its side, until it crashed far in the distance. The recruits exchanged quick looks, impressed. Despite themselves, when the bombing finally stopped, Ralvik said, the ridge was in ruins. Parts of it were still burning. The smell of smoke hung heavy over everything, but we were still there. More importantly, many more of us had survived than should have. The humans were the reason for that. They were blistered, bruised, and coughing from the smoke, but when the call came to check the lines, they were already on their feet again. They began clearing rubble, digging out buried supplies, and setting up new firing positions before the enemy could launch a ground attack. Ralvik's voice was quiet now, but firm. That night, I saw courage in its purest form. Not the courage of standing in a line and holding a rifle, but the courage to walk into fire to save another life. It is the kind of courage you cannot teach in any academy. It is something humans carry with them, and it makes them more dangerous than any weapon I have ever seen. For a long moment, no one spoke. The recruits seemed lost in the image of a ridge burning under the night sky, with humans running through the flames to drag others to safety. Finally, Ralvik leaned back. His eyes moved across each of them. You wanted to hear about human wars. Remember this night well, for in all my years of fighting, I have seen nothing like it. And what came after was even more telling. The enemy thought the bombing would break us. Instead, it made the humans fight harder. The next day was the final push of the Orion campaign. And that, he said, his voice hardening again, is a story worth every breath it takes to tell. The recruits, already caught in the pull of his words, waited in silence. They knew he was leading them toward the moment the war reached its end, and none of them intended to leave before hearing it. The air in the Union Station Hall felt heavier now. The recruits could almost see the ridge in their minds, still glowing from the memory of the fire Ralvik had described. But the old veteran was not done. He took a slow breath and continued, his voice steady and deep. After the night of fire, he began. Something changed in the war. We had been holding the ridge for weeks, fighting off the enemy again and again. Before that night, they came at us with full strength, as if they believed we could be broken. After that night, they hesitated. Not because of me, not because of our walls or weapons. It was because of the humans. The recruits listened closely, leaning forward. I noticed it the very next morning, Ralvik said. The enemy scouts stayed farther back than usual. They used the terrain for cover and avoided being seen. We sent patrols down the slope, and for the first time in days, we reached the base without a single shot being fired at us. That was not normal. The enemy was watching, but they were not eager to fight. He rested his metal hand against the table, the polished surface catching the light. Later that day, we intercepted enemy communications. I could not understand their language, but one of our translators told me the messages spoke of humans specifically. They called them night ghosts and fire runners. They said humans did not fear death, that they could not be stopped once they decided to move. These were not just rumors. This was fear taking hold. The youngest recruit, Darrow, tilted his head. Fear. But they still outnumbered you. Ralvik nodded. Yes, they had more troops, more machines, more firepower. But war is not just about numbers. Fear changes how an army moves. It makes them slower, more cautious. It makes them choose the long path instead of the fast one. And in war, hesitation can be deadly. He leaned forward slightly. The enemy began avoiding direct fights with human units. If they learned that a section of the ridge was defended by humans, they would attack elsewhere first. When they were forced to engage, they would try ambushes instead of open charges. Even then, the humans found ways to turn those traps against them. Ralvik allowed himself a brief, almost proud smile. I remember one day when an enemy unit tried to lure a human squad into a narrow pass. They thought they could trap them there with fire from both sides. The humans walked right into it, but not by mistake. They had already guessed the trap. When the enemy began firing, the humans threw smoke grenades and vanished from sight. By the time the smoke cleared, they were behind the enemy position, forcing them to retreat. Garan, the tall recruit, frowned. Did the humans plan all of this themselves? Yes, Ralvik said. They listened to advice. They worked with our officers, but in the middle of a fight, they acted on instinct, and their instincts were sharper than most I have seen. He took a slow drink before setting his mug down again. The enemy's fear grew worse with every failed attack. They began spreading strange stories among their own troops. Some claimed humans could fight for days without sleep. Others said they could see in the dark. There were even whispers that humans would rather die than leave a comrade behind, and that they would come back for you no matter how deep you hid. The dangerous thing was many of those whispers were true. The recruits sat in silence, imagining what it would be like to face such an enemy. Ralvik's tone turned thoughtful. I do not think the humans set out to scare them. They simply did what came naturally to them. But in war, even natural actions can become a weapon. A soldier who refuses to quit, who pushes forward when others would fall back, such a soldier changes the way the enemy thinks. The humans became that kind of soldier, not just as individuals, but as a whole. He straightened a little in his chair. There was one battle during this time that showed the enemy's fear better than anything else. A large enemy force moved toward the northern slope of the ridge. We expected them to attack at dawn, but instead they stopped short of the ridge and built defensive lines of their own. They had the numbers to overwhelm us, yet they stayed in place. Only later did we learn why they had spotted the human banners on the ridge that morning. Darrow blinked in surprise. They turned back because of a flag. Ralvik's eyes narrowed. A flag is not just cloth. It is a message. It tells the enemy who stands in front of them. And when that flag belongs to fighters who have walked through fire without breaking, it is more than a message, it is a warning. The recruits exchanged looks, the weight of his words settling in. Ralvik's voice softened. Fear can be as strong as any wall. Once it takes root, it spreads quickly. I saw enemy soldiers hesitate to move forward even when they had clear orders. I saw commanders make slower plans, trying to avoid direct contact with human squads. Every delay gave us more time to prepare, more time to heal, more time to strengthen the ridge. The humans never rested, and their presence made the enemy less certain with every passing day. He looked around the table, meeting each of their eyes in turn. When you fight beside humans, you learn something important. They do not win battles only with weapons. They win them by making the enemy believe they cannot be beaten. And once that belief takes hold, half the battle is already won. The hall was quiet except for the distant hum of machinery. The recruits seemed to be holding their breath, waiting for what would come next. Ralvik took one last sip from his mug before placing it down with care. The enemy's fear gave us the opening we needed. We knew they would attack again eventually, but we also knew they would not attack the same way. And that was when the humans decided the time had come to strike back, not just hold the ridge. Garan leaned forward slightly. You mean the final battle? Ralvik's gaze grew sharper. Yes, the final push of the Orion campaign. The day we left the ridge and took the fight to them. The day the humans showed exactly what makes them so dangerous. The recruits straightened in their seats. The tension in the air had shifted again. They knew the next part of the story would not just be about holding ground. It would be about taking it. Ralvik sat back slightly, but his voice carried a quiet weight. The enemy had learned to fear the humans, but on that last day, they learned something else. They learned what it feels like when humans decide they are done defending and ready to end the fight entirely. And with that, He let the silence stretch, as if letting them feel the weight of what was coming before speaking again. Ralvik paused. Looking over the recruits, the room was quiet. Every eye fixed on him. He knew this part of the story was the one they all waited for. The moment when the humans stopped defending and started fighting to win. The day came after weeks of waiting. He began. The enemy was still scared of the ridge and the humans who held it, but they had not given up. Their lines were stretched, their supplies running low. We could feel it too. The air was thick with tension. He leaned forward, hands clasped. The humans gathered their squads early that morning. You could see it in their faces. They were tired, yes, but their eyes burned with something else. Determination, not just to survive, but to end this war. Ralvik remembered the command meeting. Their leader, a woman named Mira, stood before us. She spoke simply but clearly. We fight today not just for ourselves, but for all who cannot fight. We will make this the last battle on this ridge. We will not give them a chance to return. The recruits listened, feeling the weight of her words even now. The humans moved like a wave when the sun rose. Their armor gleamed under the light. They carried rifles, grenades, and tools for the fight ahead. But what made them different was how they moved together, not just as soldiers, but as a single force. Ralvik smiled faintly. The enemy thought they could hold their positions easily. They had set up barricades and traps all along the northern slope, but the humans were not fooled. Instead of charging blindly, they used the landscape to their advantage. He described the attack. Small groups advanced in shifts. One group would fire to distract, while another moved through the rocks and crevices. They climbed walls, crossed ravines, and pushed through thick brush, never giving the enemy a moment's rest. Explosions shook the ground, but the humans kept going. I saw one soldier, named Ren, carry an injured comrade while still firing his weapon. Another, called Lena, used a grappling hook to scale a cliff and disable an enemy cannon. Their teamwork was perfect. The enemy tried to respond. They launched counterattacks, sending squads to flank the humans. But every move was met with swift response. The humans used signals, quick calls, and signs to coordinate. It was like watching a dance, fast, precise, and deadly. Ralvik's eyes shone as he continued. As the battle went on, the enemy's morale broke. They saw the humans were not just strong fighters, but smart ones. The humans saved their strongest attacks for the worst moments. Always waiting for the right chance, he paused. And then came the moment no one expected. The humans reached the enemy's command post. It was heavily guarded, but they moved silently. Mira led the charge herself, breaking through the doors with a small team. They captured the enemy leader and sent a message. The war was over. The recruits gasped. How did the humans avoid so many losses? Darrow asked. Ralvik nodded thoughtfully. They took risks. Yes, but they also cared for each other like family. If someone was hurt, they stopped to help. If a position was lost, they regrouped and tried a new plan. They never gave up. And that made all the difference. He leaned back, voice calm. When the battle ended, the ridge was ours. The enemy surrendered or fled. The humans stood victorious, tired but proud. They had not only defended their home, but pushed back a force that many thought unbeatable. The room was silent, the recruits filled with awe. Ralvik smiled softly. That day, the humans showed what it means to fight for something bigger than themselves. They fought with heart, with courage, and with a will that no enemy could break. It was the final push that ended the war and earned them respect across the stars. He looked around. Remember this story well. In war, strength is important. But the greatest strength comes from unity and courage. The humans had both. And that is why they will always be feared and respected. The room was quiet as Ralvik looked around at the recruits. Their faces were serious now, the stories he had told weighing heavily on their minds. The old veteran set his cup down slowly and began the final part of his tale. War is not just about battles or victories, Ralvik said. It is about what those battles teach us. The humans taught me many things during the Orion campaign. Not only how to fight better, but how to live with courage even when hope is scarce. He took a deep breath and continued. One of the hardest lessons was to never underestimate the spirit of those who fight for each other. Humans do not just fight for themselves, they fight for their families, their friends, their homes. That bond makes them stronger than any weapon or machine. The recruits nodded. Some had already seen the truth of those words in their own training, but hearing it from a war veteran added weight. During the campaign, Ralvik said, I saw humans refuse to leave a fallen comrade behind. Even when the enemy fire was heavy, they would risk their own lives to bring one person back. I asked why they did this when it seemed so dangerous. The answer was simple. No one is left behind. He smiled slightly. That is a promise that binds them together. It is a promise many of us have never understood until we saw it in action. Ralvik paused, then his voice grew softer. Another lesson was how to face fear. I have fought many battles, and fear always comes with it. But humans, they do not ignore fear. They feel it, but they do not let it control them. They move forward anyway. The recruits seemed to feel the power of that idea. Courage is not the absence of fear, Ralvik said, but the choice to act even when afraid. The humans showed me that courage can spread. When one soldier stands strong, it lifts others. When one refuses to give up, it gives hope to the whole group. He looked each recruit in the eye. You will face fear in your own way. Remember what the humans taught me. Do not run from it. Use it. Ralvik shifted. Remembering another part of the campaign, the humans also taught me about adaptability. The enemy thought they could trap us with fire, with traps, with numbers. But humans change. They do not fight one way only. They learn, they adjust, and they find new ways to win. He gestured with his metal hand. That is why the enemy grew afraid. They could not predict what humans would do next. They could not trap them in one place or one plan. The humans stayed flexible, and that made them unstoppable. Ralvik's voice lowered as if speaking a secret. In every fight, the humans found strength not just in their weapons, but in their minds. They used strategy and teamwork better than any enemy I have seen. That is a power you should never forget. The recruits were silent, imagining how much more powerful their own squads could become if they held the same spirit. Ralvik smiled warmly, and finally, the humans taught me about hope, even in the darkest moments of the war. When the ridge was burning and death was all around, they never lost hope. They believed the fight was worth it, that they could change the future. He leaned back. That hope kept them moving forward. It kept them alive when many others would have given up. It is the greatest weapon anyone can carry. The oldest recruit, a quiet soldier named Krell, spoke softly. Do you think we can learn to be like that? Ralvik looked at him kindly. Yes, I believe we can. We do not have to be human to learn from them. Courage, loyalty, hope, these are not gifts given to one race. They come from choice. Every one of you can choose to be like that. The room felt lighter after that. The recruits sat a little taller, their eyes bright with new determination. Ralvik finished with a simple truth. The humans taught me that war is more than fighting. It is about what you carry inside. If you carry courage, loyalty, hope, and the will to protect others, then no matter what enemy you face, you will never be defeated. He stood slowly, signaling the end of the story. Remember these lessons. Carry them into your own battles, because someday you will be the ones telling these stories. The recruits stood as well, their faces full of respect and quiet strength. They knew they had been given more than a story. They had been given a guide for their own lives. As the hall emptied, Ralvik watched them go. A small smile touched his lips. He had seen many wars. He had seen many soldiers come and go. But this story, the story of the humans, was one he would carry forever.